It's a church, not a lot. Good to go.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Richard Kilbeck. I'm privileged to be the chair of Abraham's Table of Long Island. On behalf of our steering committee, I want to welcome the folks who are here in person and to our friends who are watching remotely to this very important panel, challenging topic: how should the faith community respond to rising hate here on Long Island? Let me ask the audience present, has anybody been to the Old Bethpage restoration site? A lot of hands are going up. Okay, to our remote folks as well. Anybody who's been to the restoration site has to notice the Minetto Hill Church, Methodist Church. It was built in the 1850s. It was moved there when it opened in the 1960s. Excuse me. And I happen to love that place. It's very idyllic. Takes you back to pre-Civil War America. Everything was simple, peaceful, unless you were a slave. And it's a lovely time. It's a lovely place. What few of the visitors know about the Minetto Hill Church, I learned when I was a teacher in Plainview. And back in the 1980s, we had a grant to have high school kids speak to the original residents, surviving residents, when Plainview was a farm community. And one of those residents, his name was Sam Panzarelli, the son of Italian immigrants. He said to the student who was interviewing him, one of my memories was really scary. The Plainview, the Minetto Hill Methodist Church in the 1920s was abandoned. He said, and my mother always said to me, don't go there, because it was the headquarters of the Plainview Ku Klux Klan. And that's kind of a shock, like the Ku Klux Klan in Plainview, in that church, which is now an idyllic centerpiece of an idyllic setting. What was going on? Well, the truth is, in the 1920s, the Klan exploded with all its hatred all over the country, very active here on Long Island. And what they did in the 1920s was they added to their hate list. So right after the Civil War, they were primarily targeting freed slaves. They died out. They came back in the 1920s with a much longer hate list. By then, Jewish, Catholic, Italian, Polish, Russian immigrants were pouring in. They were added to the hate list. Blacks were moving out of the South in huge numbers. So northern blacks were added to the hate list. And it was an ugly time. It was really an ugly time. So historians tell us that hate tends to rear its ugly head when people are afraid, when they're angry, when they're seeing things happen that they can't control, when they want to blame, they want to scapegoat, to use the Jewish expression. Jews were scapegoated for years. They wanted to blame for their own problems. And they tell us, you can see what these conditions are. They repeat. And if you were listening to what I was saying about the 1920s, it was a scary time. It was a time when people were recovering from a global pandemic. In fact, in the early 20s, it was still on. It was the Spanish flu. We were in a severe recession after World War I. There was rapid change. Folks felt they couldn't control life anymore. New products, crazy things that, like the radio. What's the radio? You can listen to anybody, anywhere. What's going on here? And again, massive influx of folks that were strange and different and scary. Eastern and Southern Europeans, darker, wrong religion. So when historians look at these kind of periods, they see trends. Is there a recession going on if you're looking for hate? Are there population changes going on if you're looking for hate? Are there cultural changes that are scaring people? Are traditional beliefs being challenged? Is there a sense that certain groups in society are losing their status? Are there political and cultural leaders feeding the hate? These are some of the things that bring about hate. Hate in the 1920s, and I'm sorry to say, hate today. We live in such a time. I don't have to tell you. Just 2 weeks ago, horrible anti-Semitic flyers distributed on lawns and driveways all over Rockville Center. 3 weeks earlier, on the 4th of July, when we celebrate our diversity and our commitment to human dignity, a firebomb thrown in a mosque in Ronkonkoma. In February, a Bayport man charged with sending dozens of hate-filled letters to LGBT organizations, sentenced yesterday to quite a lengthy stay in prison. In January this year, Long Island couple arrested for harassing a black family, including young kids, leaving a basketball game in Brooklyn on the Long Island Railroad. And you know, despite the fact that hate crimes are underreported, the U.S. Department of Justice found that in New York State, the number of hate crimes based on race, ethnicity, or ancestry rose from 153 in 2018 to 200 in 2020. That's a 31% increase. And just a few months ago, the Anti-Defamation League found that New York State has the most anti-Semitic incidents of any state in the United States right now. My friends, hate breeds hate. And unchecked hate escalates from words and flyers to violence and, yeah, even genocide. In November of 2018, marking the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, the violent pogrom that some say launched the violent period of the Holocaust, Time magazine at that time said, quote, "People did not need to be anti-Semitic. They did not need to be infused with hatred. They just needed to remain passive. For the terror released by the Nazis to take its terrible toll." I have to say, at that time, in the 1930s, most, if not all, of the major faith leaders in Germany said nothing. They were passive. One was not. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor, one of the few who spoke out early, often, loudly. He was executed by the Nazis in April of 1945, just weeks before the war ended. This is what he told us. "Silence in the face of evil is evil itself. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act." As Time reported, and I'm quoting, quote, "Hateful rhetoric built a case for Hitler's Nazi regime to separate, isolate, dehumanize, and ultimately exterminate an entire group solely for who they were. The Holocaust," Time wrote, "didn't start with killing, it started with words." So, the faith community cannot be silent again, as they were in the 1930s. As hateful words spread, the words of hate leaders have great meaning. And that's what brings us here tonight, to remember what we were told by Pastor Bonhoeffer. Not to speak is to speak, not to act is to act. So we've assembled a wonderful panel of faith and community leaders who, in their life experience, in their leadership, in their faith commitments, are standing up against hate. And we've invited them tonight to discuss, frankly, what should the faith community be doing right now, right here on Long Island, so they're not, again, passive and silent. So let me introduce our panel. To my right is our moderator, Tracy Edwards, Regional Director of the Long Island NAACP. And we have Rabbi Lena Zeverini of Kehillat Shalom Synagogue in Cold Spring Harbor. And she's also a member of the Suffolk County Human Rights Commission. We have then Reverend Earl Thorpe, pastor of a racially diverse and very justice-oriented church, the Church in the Garden in Garden City. Frederick K. Brewington, well-known civil rights attorney and a champion of civil rights, as well as a lay leader in the Methodist Church. And finally, a member of our steering committee, Dr. Isma Chaudhry, who is co-chair of the Islamic Center of Long Island. And they are going to address tonight three things. What is hate? Why is this happening? And most importantly, what should the faith community, and frankly, all people of goodwill do? So during the program, if you have any questions, those of you watching remotely, you can enter them into the chat. For those of you here, you can raise your hand when we get to the Q&A. And for those of you new to our program, you can give us your email, go to our website, and there's a place where you can sign in on the website. So with that, let me turn the program over to our moderator, Tracy Edwards, and we begin.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dick and Abraham's Table, and thank you to the Suffolk-wide JCC for hosting this event. They are always so good to all of us, and we truly appreciate their partnership. So we have wonderful leaders that we're going to engage, but I think before we do that, what I'm going to do is ask Fred Brewington to come up and set the table for us on the law so that we have a better understanding of, from a legal perspective, what is hate, and give some examples. Right?
I'm just going to turn this podium around just a little bit so I can see the screen. We can put up that first slide. First of all, good evening to everybody. Good evening. Look to your right. And if you're in this aisle, look to your left. And then look to your left. Look at the person next to you. Now look to the people in front of you and behind you. In this room right now, there is some diversity, yes? Yes. But one of the things that we really need to understand is that the diversity that we cherish, the diversity that we embrace, the diversity that we have in this room and online, for some people is scary. And it shouldn't be, because their fear is based on a level, and I'm going to say this word, of ignorance. They don't know, they don't want to know, and sometimes they choose not to know. I stood behind a car on a red light just not too far from here that said, "Go, Brandon." And for anybody else, you might just think, well, that's a nice bumper sticker. But that's a statement on a soccer mom's car that also said, "When I die, don't let me vote Democrat." The level of hate is something that exists within our society, within our world, and also within, unfortunately, our neighborhoods. So, what do we can go into the next one. We want to just remember January 6th. Everybody remember that? Well, let me just tell you, that didn't happen because someone just decided one morning we were going to do that. Somebody took a match and put it to gasoline.
Can you just move towards that side so they see on the camera, so you're visible on the camera? Yeah. Good.
Someone had to, how are we doing here?
Good.
All right? Someone had to like that, or some persons had to like that. And what we saw was a reality that there was an undercurrent going on that came about because of political statements that were being made in public that gave license to individuals who wanted to hate. It wasn't, they were forced to, they wanted to hate. And so this is just one of the pictures from the January 6th occupation of our nation that wanted to overturn the government so that some of that hate would rise to the top. Next slide. So what do we have in New York State? We have definitions that have been made by lawmakers. This is not the definition that we always live with. The definition under the penal law, which is our codified legal statutes in New York State that tell us what is a violation, what is the concept of, in this situation, a hate crime. Many of you have used and heard that term before, right? Everybody's heard the term hate crime. Well, let me just tell you, what you think is a hate crime sometimes is not a hate crime under the law. And when we see things that happen and we say, why isn't somebody doing something about that? The reality is that much of the law is set up so that nothing can be done or will be done. And we shouldn't fool ourselves in thinking that simply because we call it a hate crime, something will happen. So I left this up here so you can see that a person commits a hate crime when he or she commits a specified offense and either, and there's the sections, intentionally selects the person against whom the offense is being committed based on their race, based on their color, based on their religion, based on their ethnicity, based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. But in this situation, their disability, or even with regard to their status as a person who's convicted of a crime. But in this situation, we should understand that this definition doesn't cover everything. And it's really a problem. Go to the next slide, please. Because we end with or. Oh, by the way, this is the Proud Boys marching in Patchogue and Bayshore, October 2021. If you didn't know, how many people knew that happened in October 2021? A lot of people in this room didn't know. Right down the middle of the street, take a look at the size of that truck. And by the way, what was happening just a year before this on the streets? Black Lives Matter. If Black Lives Matter had done this, there would have been a bunch of arrests. There was no permits. This happened, and nothing happened. That's going to be part of our discussion. Next slide, please. So, and this is the subpart B. Intentionally commits or the acts constituting an offense in whole or in substantial part. It can be for one or more reason relating to that person's identity, ancestry, background, etc. Those things that we consider to be part of what God made you to be. And then going to the next one. These are the Proud Boy stickers that were found in Rockville Center on poles that were going on, and these are just 3 of probably 50 or 60 that they were slapping on poles as they marched down. Next slide, please. And here's the kicker. Proof of race, color, national origin, and the other categories that the victim or both of the defendant and the victim does not by itself, that they're part of that party, part of that group, part of that race, part of that religion. That doesn't necessarily serve as any level of proof under the law that it is considered to be a hate crime. Did you know that? Next slide, please. This is down in, I believe this is in Patchogue or in Bayshore, but this is a gentleman on the sidewalk, outdoor dining, flashing the Proud Boys white supremacy sign. So many people, remember when we were younger, we used to say, hey, okay. Well, if you turn that sideways, that turns into the Proud Boys sign for white supremacy. Next. Proud Boys marching in Rockville Center, November 2021, right down the middle of the street. And they had the audacity not to just stay on their side of the street. They crossed into traffic, stopped everything, went into the all the merchant stores, gave out flyers, harassed individuals, called people the N-word in the streets of Rockville Center. And somebody tell me how many violations or summonses were given out? 0. Next. Penal law. And by the way, that section that we dealt with of the penal law before, this next section 3 has a page and a half of all the potential crimes that could be hate crimes if the particulars that we talked about were part of it. But here's one that's commonly referred to as a very specific and almost self-executing crime that's seldom used in our penal law. This is aggravated harassment in the 1st degree, and makes it a felony to harass someone because of their color, religion, and other factors. And in this situation, it becomes, please read this, public that burning a cross in public in a publicly visible manner, damaging premises, used for primary religious purposes, etching, painting, drawing a swastika without the express permission of the owner, or etching or drawing or putting up a place or a noose, which we've had many here on Long Island, right? As a matter of fact, I've got several cases, is considered to be a crime and is supposed to be self-executing. But we have, unfortunately, people that are in government that refuse to enforce. And I want to just say that because it's going to be part of the discussion. Next. Why? Because if we forget, what's the term in the Jewish community? Never forget. If we forget, if this doesn't send chills up and down your spine, if this does not make you realize how serious this hatred can be, if we think about what happened to the young man down in Texas just a few years ago who was dragged to his death in the back of a pickup truck because he was a black man. And we see the swastikas going up all over the place, and we see nooses showing up in workplaces. We cannot afford to not be vigilant. Next slide, please. And that's why people kind of hit the streets. George Floyd was something that was a demarcation of a place and time, but the staying power of individuals to be able to maintain the pressure on the system has been very, very, very difficult to maintain. And as a result of that, people get ground down. Our young people get disenchanted. They don't clearly all have an understanding of the background. So that's just a little bit of the background in terms of what the crimes are, but what their relationship is to society is so important because those laws are there, but they're not any good if they're not enforced.
You can keep that. Well, thank you very much, Fred. And before I start asking questions, I'm not sure if everyone knows about the gold Brandon symbol.
Okay.
So can you just share what the background of the gold Brandon? I'm not sure. Does everybody know what that is? Okay, so I have some no's. If you could just.
My understanding is that when you see that on the back of a shirt or on a T-shirt, that's code. That's a code for basically, I'm with you in this hate thing. I'm with you in terms of the white supremacy thing. And that Brandon is a term utilized for the purpose of transmitting to someone without saying it. Just like if you see on a bumper sticker that says 88. Anybody know what that is? What's the 8th letter in the alphabet? Somebody do it on your fingers. HH, 88. Yes, ma'am. So when you see that on a bumper sticker, you need to understand because you're not seeing that. Or when you see, there are a number of them. I don't want to go through all of them, but only by educating yourself and understanding that hate is all around us. It was at the stoplight in front of me just a few minutes ago. So that's what Brandon is about.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I still can't get that picture out of my mind. But thank you very much, Fred, for giving this background. So I want to just start by asking our leaders, why do we think that we're here? Was there a moment in time? Was this an accumulation of events? Like, why is it that we are at this place where we have these bumper stickers and these incidents that are going on Long Island? So I'm going to start with you, Rabbi Weiner.
Thanks for inviting me, Dick. It's a privilege to be here. I'm not a historian, I'm not an economist, so I did resonate with what you said, Dick, about fear. I think that fear often comes out as anger, whether it's in our personal lives or often when I'm angry, it's a fear-based thing. I feel threatened or feel fear for somebody in my life. Um, I think there's a backlash against Barack Obama, right? White people, mostly, yeah, white people, mostly white men, I think, feel threatened. You spoke about people fearing losing their place and their status. There's a cartoon going around Facebook right now of a white man sitting on a park bench and a black woman sits down next to him and he falls off the bench and screams, "Ah, I've been pushed off the bench and there's no more room." And, 3/4 of the bench is still there. And that's the situation that I think that we are facing. I don't know that there's much more to say about that. I think I have one more thing to say, which is about how we use language. I think some of, you mentioned, Fred, "Let's go Brandon," right? And these kinds of language boiling down to slogans and the way that we speak to each other is not new. I think we certainly can't blame hatred on social media because people weren't being lynched there wasn't Facebook and Twitter in the age of lynching, but it facilitates the dehumanization that I think we are all experiencing.
Thank you. So Reverend Thorpe, I'll ask you to just weigh in because, your perspective of not only a pastor, but a Black man is very important in this discussion. So I, am confident that you have been the victim of racism sometime in your life. So if you could just share your perspective of, do you think that this has just been happening all along and now other people are just waking up to it? Or do you think that has been an increase?
The answer is both. And good evening to everyone here, to this panel. Thanks for bringing us here. It's not lost, should not be lost on any of us that what's happening today is just what's been happening for a long, long time. This country, whether we want to believe it or not, whether we want to teach it correctly in our classrooms, has been a site of slavery, violence, guns, and death. From the beginning. And until we start understanding that what's happening now is just a perpetuation of what has been happening for decades, centuries, then we're not going to effectively get the answer on how to stop it. We can blame certain people. We can say this is the manifestation of this person in office, these people in office, these people today. And we don't want to call it out. I'll say it. Trump and Trumpism has awakened and has reinvigorated those who believe this far before Barack Obama, far before Bill Clinton, Democrats, Republicans. It has been a country that has subsisted on the minority being in power above and beyond those who are the majority who are not. And so when we start looking at how this problem keeps festering and becomes more in our face because of social media, right? That we check Facebook, and now we're seeing, because of technology where you can film things, you're seeing what has been happening in many parts of this country for a very, very long time. And we didn't want to believe it. And now when we're thrust into the spotlight of seeing it, we want to avert our eyes. We cannot do that anymore. When I was growing up and I used to tell people about how it was to be a young Black boy in Albany, New York, they didn't believe me. But then when Amnon Louima and all these different things that happened, they saw that and they're like, oh, and I said, this is normal. This is normative for me because I grew up with this. And now it's like, oh, this is a tragedy. How did this? And then we want to make it so fine and unique and put a very nice bow on it. Oh, this is only because the rise of this. It's not just Trumpism. Trumpism is just it's symptomatic of what's been going on in this country for a long time. And until we start really looking at that notion about how we look at each other, how we look at ourselves, yes, it's fear. Yes, it's insecurity. Yes, it's ignorance. It's all those things wrapped up in one, because everyone here has had a moment when they were something not of themselves. Whether you thought you were not racist at a point, it just happens. We are built in this society to feel that. We're built in this society to understand that. And we perpetuate it even when we don't think. And if someone calls us out, we get mad at them. So the answer is never neat. The answer is never pretty. We just have to come to the realization that this is where we are. And in order for us to change, and I know we're going to get to this, the only thing that beats hate is love. But the things that make up love are myriad. It's just not, oh, just love your neighbor. You have to, it's more than that. So I'll stop there because I think that's enough.
Thank you very much. So Fred, I'm going to skip you and go to my sister, Dr. Isma, for her perspective. Because, you know, I rode the Long Island Railroad, and September 11th, I really witnessed months and months and months of my Muslim brothers and sisters just being harassed on the train, even if it was in a quiet, subtle way, made to feel uncomfortable. So this is not new for your Islamic Center, but I'd love to hear your perspective of, do you think it has been on the rise?
So thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Dick, Abraham Stable, and Betsheva, and JCC over here for hosting this event. And this is a part, everybody can hear me, right? Thank you. So this is a part two. We had a discussion around hate and various manifestations of hate. And today, as a family, as a community, together, because I don't think that a group of people can just come up with some kind of a magic and make things better for us. I think each one of us has a commitment to it. And since I do represent faith communities, so does my fellow panelists over here. It's very interesting when we look at scripture. Scripture talks about hate very clearly. Scripture talks about love very clearly. Scripture does not say that the opposite of hate is love. Pick up any scripture. Scripture teaches us to love and to control the emotion of hate. Hate is an emotion, love is an emotion, empathy, these are all further, what do I say, human enhancements to lean towards either hate or love. I'll share a verse from the Quran, and it's when Fred was talking about various laws around hate. So Quran in chapter 5, verse 28, it guides us. More than that, it cautions us. And I have seen it in every scripture, that caution and that guidance, which is there for us. Do not let your hatred of people incite you to aggression. I find it a great teaching. It doesn't say turn hate into love. Love you enhance on your own, use various other attributes to do that. So Tracy, coming back to your question, we have noticed there is an increase in the hate crimes. Take any community, anybody who's a minority in a group takes the brunt. And there has been centuries of this abuse. However, the hate crimes are going down. is this is, I think, the worst challenge to human intelligence. We are all here, each one of us, collectively, individually. You ask me as a Muslim, as a South Asian, Fred as a Black leader, Reverend as a Black leader, Lena as a female rabbi, you as NAACP champion. Each one of us, or anybody over here, has taken the brunt of it. So, first of all, what do we do? This is not that we will wave one and this is going to be fixed. There has to be a collective recognition. It's so interesting from your presentation, Fred. What happens if you don't stop at the red light? There's a clarity in the law on that. There's no ambiguity. On hate crimes, hate speech, nobody's very clear about it. No, this is not considered a hate crime. Why? I feel I've been discriminated against. So again, as a society, we need to say no to challenging our basic intelligence. The other thing is, Tracy, you talked about various tropes, various stereotypes. In about another 5-10 minutes, we're going to take a short break so that the Muslims in the audience can take a prayer break for 10 minutes. That could be odd, that could be uncomfortable to stop the flow of a discussion and have, some people just get up and say their prayers. But then again, that is what we do towards each other when we live in a society. Again, and we can discuss this later, how to address the lack of clarity on hate crimes, on implementation, on somebody saying that I've been discriminated against and not being followed. Thank you.
Thank you. So Fred, I'm going to come back to you because we have hundreds of elected officials on Long Island, literally hundreds. And they all are very good at coming when there is hate has no home here, when there are rallies and events that follow a horrific incident that happens to our communities. They are called and they all come. But my concern and my question to you, and to all of you really is, are we going too soft on our elected officials when it comes to action, follow-up, and accountability?
Well, thank you for that question. I'd like to quote a great theologian, like a dull knife just ain't cutting. Talking loud ain't saying nothing. James Brown, 1964. Oftentimes we have individuals that give us a lot of lip service. They show up for the photo op. When it comes down to getting things done and standing against the tide of racism, standing against the tide of anti-Semitism, standing against the tide of prejudice against Muslim folks, standing against the tide, they can't wade in the water. And I'm using these images for a real purpose, because the importance of having people who say and do what they say as opposed to say and then don't show up is a problem. So Tracy, I think the answer to your question is I think we are way too soft. We allow folks to come in, take the photo op, sign the attendance sheet, and then the next day show up with folks that are the very, very people that caused the problem in the first place. And when we say that we all shake our heads and suck our teeth and don't call these folks into account. Accountability and transparency is exactly what we have to get back to and not be apologetic about it. But that takes a little bit of true grit. Takes a little bit of true grit.
Thank you. So, I'd like to open it up for anyone to jump in, because I guess what I'm trying to think about is what is it that the collective we can do to encourage, support, collaborate with our elected officials so that there is true follow-up and accountability. Because I can't, I'm hoping not to believe that they don't care. I believe that they do care. But again, I think that this is on us, that we are not doing enough, the collective we are not doing enough to say, these are the things that we would like you to do, elected officials, as a follow-up to our Hate Has No Home here. So I would open it up to any of you just to think about what can we do better in order to better hold and support our elected officials to do those things that we truly all need them to do.
I'll just start by saying at the Church in the Garden City, Long Island, 68 Osborne Road, when the egregious and frankly downright sinful decision came from the Supreme Court regarding women's reproductive rights and health came by, I preached a sermon telling my congregation theologically where I stood and where the Church in the Garden should stand theologically. It may have surprised some people to see that a pastor is pro-choice, and we don't have to debate the wording because pro-choice and pro-life are just muddies the water. But one of the things that I said was that the people who come, the politicians who may come to my church, to have a photo op, which they don't come because it's not that type of church, they need to know, and we need to hold them accountable. And if we're going to vote in blocks as a faith community, we should have what we believe that they should contract to. That is to say, if they don't fill out and say they're going to support in writing that they're going to be, and you name it, then they won't get our support. If we don't hold people accountable by the votes, and this is the only way we can do it in politics is by voting as blocks, then we're missing the point. And so I would suggest that if anyone wants to make sure that we're making a change, that I don't care if it's dog catcher, I don't care who it is, we need to have a bill of rights of what we believe you should be voting for. That really represent what we as a community believe. Now, some of us may not agree on everything, but we have to get with politicians and hold them accountable so that we can have the majority of things that we all agree upon put together. And so it's not something esoteric. It's literally holding people accountable and saying, we're not going to vote for you as a block, this church, this faith communities. We're not going to vote for you unless you sign up with us and you agree to what we believe that this country should be. And if some of us disagree, okay. But the majority of us will say, we're going to hold you to this. And that's just one way. And I'm sure there's people smarter than me who have other reasons. So I'm other ways of doing it, and I'm happy to have that. I'm happy to be in that conversation with anyone who wants to see justice for all. And if you're not in that, don't bother. I'll still love you as a Christian, right? To the people who are on the other side of me, I still love you with a Christian love, but don't come to my church or don't think we're going to vote for you just because you're flashy or you're saying it like you think it is, and it doesn't hold up the beliefs and values that we believe, and that is justice for all. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I'll ask Rabbi Lena and Dr. Isma to weigh in, because I think what has happened is we've somehow twisted this a little bit. That the elected officials come and knock on the door and hand us their, I did it too, hand the pamphlet to say, this is what I'm going to do, or this is what I believe. But somehow I think that we need to, as you're mentioning, we, collective, we need to say, no, this is ours, and this is what we want you to do, and this is what we are going to hold you accountable to. Somehow I think that we need to flip it back. And we're all not going to agree on anything, to your point, Reverend Thorpe, but what's your thought about, is there a way we can do this? I think it would be a positive thing. It's not, but it's more of a proactive way for us to band together as a group on those things that we can agree on and say, this is what our expectation should be of you, that we will hold you accountable. So I'd like to have some thoughts about that from both of you.
I think one of the aspects of this is that I think many of my colleagues here are very well educated, and I have congregants that are very well educated on the issues, but I also think that many of us are not that well educated on the specifics of the issues and some of the nitty gritty. And it seems to me that a lot of the issues that we're facing take place bureaucratically. And that, like, one of the things that we're struggling with the Anti-Bias Task Force and the Human Rights Commission is exactly these categorizations of hate crimes. And one of the things that we're struggling with Suffolk County is how they categorize graffiti. So if a swastika is drawn in a public park on a school, they currently say, oh, that's not against an individual. It's not a hate crime, it's bias graffiti, it's not a hate crime. And we're really struggling to get.
It's an incident.
Yeah, it's an incident, well, it's not a crime, it's an incident. But then the whole other piece that we're struggling with is to actually get them to categorize it and categorize the different forms of graffiti. This is a nitty gritty issue. It's maybe not as sexy as like, oh, how do we respond to, this big incident? But it's really important so that we can track what's going on. So, one of the things that I think you talked about, the Dobbs decision, that's the result of 50 years of organizing. And I feel like those of us who want to stand for progressive values and caring for each other, it's not just an emotion of somebody's, it's not just, oh, love your neighbor. It's not just touchy-feely. It's, you have to organize to make that happen. And I think that we have been out-organized. And we need to pay attention to the details, and then we need to work on those.
Normally, this is where I say I agree 100%, and I would. I'll just add a little piece to it. It's extremely, so we as faith-based communities, we do not realize that there is a power of congregation, a power of community, a power of being together. Even in this room, we represent different faith communities, but there is a very powerful expression of our presence in any setting, and we undermine them. What we need, what Fred said, grit. So we need wisdom to take care of the bureaucracy. We need courage to say, you're not welcome. This is a sacred place, and your ideology, you're not clear on that. And of course, So wisdom, courage, and we have to stay united. Reverend, what you said, that we have to there's no need to agree with everything but we do agree on dignity and humanity. So I think that's where we have to be very strong. We really have to make sure that our elected officials, in writing, in their speeches, in their whatever settings they have, and I do have respect for their work. I'm not going to undermine that, but they should distinguish between freedom of speech, hate speech, and incitement to violence and discrimination.
Well, thank you. Let's continue just on, we have a couple more minutes before we're going to take a break.
8:30.
8:30.
8:30.
Okay, we have time. So let's just continue that theme a little bit. I think, all of us agree on hate has no home here. So I think that if we use that as our guiding principle, we probably could start to work on some sort of document that all of our communities and all of our faith communities could agree on, because once you start adding 3 or 4 things, I don't think I can agree with my husband anymore on 3 or 4 things, right? But I think that we could get to 1.
I'm telling him that, buddy.
Yeah, don't tell him. He might be watching. I'm sorry. What do you think that would look like? What would be the follow-up steps for us that if we were going to band together as a group on one thing to start to this dialogue and awareness and the details, what do you think, what's some recommendations that you think that we could do?
Tracy, I thank you for asking that. I see some faces that might have been there, but earlier this year, 200 people gathered at United Methodist Church and signed a proclamation that hate has no place here. Some politicians showed up, and after that, didn't see them again. But I think that that's where we start. There is already a public proclamation against hate that has been put out by organizations that came together, anti-bias groups in Huntington and other places. We came together, and 200 people came into that congregation to say to the we didn't mention them by name, but I'll mention them today, Proud Boys and other folks, that hate has no place here. And a number of us, organizations, signed on to that. Over 60 organizations signed on to that. But the reality is that we didn't keep the wave going, and we didn't keep educating each other. It really does come down to, and Rabbi, you spoke about this, I think a little bit, that we got to talk about it. We can't be afraid to have the tough and difficult discussions that require us to be sometimes a little bit uncomfortable, and sometimes a whole lot of times uncomfortable, because you may be the one that's advocating to someone that's saying, wait, you stand with those people? I'm going to give you a little story. Truth. White woman comes into my office, says I've been harassed by officers in one of the counties on Nassau County, in Long Island. Not Nassau County, so to get the other. And I said, well, what's been happening? And she brings me video after video after video of the officer pulling her over. And it turns out that one of the things she wasn't able to record is because he was pulling her over because she had relationships with black men. And he called her a race traitor in uniform. Yeah, you heard it first here. But we're going to test that a little bit. Because when it is institutionalized and systemically institutionalized, it becomes part of what we have to try to tear down. And it's not just the elected officials, because many times they run for cover behind that bureaucratic institution. So we've got to understand that race racism it seeks to tear down walls of institution. The Human Rights Commission is there to do that, but often comes face to face with governmental barriers. We've got to then just take a look at these institutions that have gone sour and try and fix them.
Anybody want to chime in on that? Go ahead, Rachel.
I always get smarter when I always get smarter when I sit next to Fred Brewington, so I'm gonna pick up on that. He's absolutely right. And one of the things I think we need to just understand is that what we're talking about here isn't just your individual grievances of hate. It's not just, oh, well, I don't like this person because X, Y, and Z. It's how those thoughts and ideas and ideologies gets codified in law. That's what we're fighting against. You go to your own particular faith center, community, and you can figure out what they stand for and against. You come to my church, you'll see what that is. You talk to me, my parishioners come and talk to me, we can argue about that. But what I am absolutely an advocate for is how we dismantle the codification of these laws that enshrine hate and injustice in the guise of justice. And I know we can't legislate morality, but we can certainly legislate that you can't have your own personal opinion go above and beyond someone else's and cause that and codify violence because of that on every single level. So we have to start simply someplace and we look to our elected officials and we have to make sure everyone's doing this at every single state level, at the local level. And it's not just in our little hamlet, it's not in our little village, it's not in our little county, but all of New York. And then we have to move to different places. This is not a movement that just comes about, overnight. But we have to do that in every single place. And we may not see it in our lifetime, but our future children will understand what we have done if it starts today. And we've been doing that for a long time.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is stop and we're going to watch a film for 10 minutes. We're going to take a prayer break and then we're going to come back, see if you have any questions, and then we'll have our concluding statements by our last question. And you can think about this as we watch the film. What do you think the next step should be for the Long Island faith community? What should our response be?
So for our friends who are watching remotely, if there is an opportunity for a chat. So if you want to enter some questions, we'll try to get them onto the platform when we come back. Okay, so we're going to see a brief film now. I'm calling it Let the Children Lead Them. And it's kids talking about what they've experienced with hate and what should be done about hate.
Yes.
I've always loved words. Their power and nuance make them incredibly versatile tools of expression. Take the word black, for example. In a dictionary, it is simply the absence of visual light. In my mind, it is a part of my identity.
I turned around to see my classmate pulling his eyes towards his ears and some kids around him red-faced from laughter.
I heard some of my friends say she could have brought the bubonic plague here from India. People called her names, excluded her, claimed she was deviant. I looked at her and saw something similar to what I saw in the mirror. The same dark hair, the darker hued skin. Did people think I was deviant too?
Many students struggle to come to terms with their identities.
I want people to stop discriminating against immigrants because they appear different than us.
Yes, I am Nepali. Yes, we eat food with our hands. Yes, I will talk about my culture and heritage because I am proud of it.
Yes, I am black and white. Yes, I have puffy dark hair. Yes, I'm still proud of who I am. I am different, but different is good.
We were the children of Chinese immigrants. Socializing and making new friends wasn't our forte. And to top it off, my brother had special needs.
I had no trouble accepting my diagnosis. Autism was just a word, and I was still the same person. This was not how others perceived it.
I witnessed my classmates thinking it's funny if
they describe someone acting crazy as looking autistic. People tend not to get involved because it's not their problem. But if they were in a similar situation, wouldn't they want someone's help?
A new family moved into the neighborhood, and it didn't take long for us to meet. The girl was developmentally delayed and expressed being lonely. She had no friends. I started to witness how cruel the kids were to her.
I told my mom, the bus driver, whoever I could, to make these kids leave her alone. I watch on the news and in public places how people with special needs are mistreated.
Born deaf, I went to an elementary school that specialized in services for kids with a disability or some type of hearing loss. However, there was a separate part of the school where students without disabilities would learn. Once I was mainstream, I was treated differently. Kids wouldn't sit next to me in class or play with me at recess. Why was I being discriminated against for something out of my control?
When I was at recess one day, all of my friends were bullying and throwing balls at another peer due to his weight.
Around the time I entered 5th grade, I was visibly overweight. It was also the time that the bullying started.
Boys were always shoving him to the ground, throwing balls at him, and laughing hysterically.
I felt that I was all alone in the world. Nobody would associate themselves with me anymore. I started getting phone calls from restricted members telling me to kill myself.
I decided to take action. I told them people should be different.
I would like to ask each and every one of you, if you see something like this happening to anyone, anywhere, take a second, go up to them, and ask them how they are with a smile.
My hope is for people to hear this.
I began to be bullied because my mom is an addict. I would show up at school with greasy hair, dirty clothes on, smelling like cigarette smoke, and embarrassed. There were times my mom got arrested on school campus with many of my classmates watching. Some of the things this girl would say to me were like, "Kill yourself," and "You don't deserve to be alive."
Why should we be judged for something, especially if we cannot change it?
I joined the swim team as an escape. I made so many friends and loved what I was doing so much that all my problems became endurable.
I reached the realization that writing could be an outlet for other abused folks. That's when I helped organize a poetry club that provided a safe space for my LGBTQ+ peers. We spread support and love. As the club grew, so did the strength in our voices.
If the world stopped seeing differences and started appreciating the similarities, there would be a lot less hate in the world today.
Growing up in a Jewish family, I learned about giving tzedakah, donations. Once I grew older, I began to learn about the Holocaust. I struggled with this time period's horrible events, but was comforted that anti-Semitism is no longer as prevalent. I later began reading about the shooting, the 11 victims.
I could not believe that Jews in the neighboring state were killed just for their religion.
Minutes before lying in the backseat of a police car, unconscious, my uncle was frisked and choked by 2 local police officers for seeming suspicious outside of his neighborhood's mini-mart. He died before reaching the hospital. A man's heartbreaking transition from idolized Army veteran to insignificant statistic.
People who look like me are more than the negative images perpetuated by the media.
I intend to learn about other religions and cultures, so I can overcome internal prejudices I may unknowingly have.
Every ethnicity is beautiful.
A change in one person's perspective is a change in everything.
I work to overcome difficulties my diagnosis creates for me and strive to not let it become my only defining characteristic.
In response to these feelings, I wanted to establish a solution. What I came up with is not only practical, but tragically overlooked. Cordial communication.
With understanding and the right words, we can become agents of positive change.
Words are powerful. They have endlessly destructive potential. So when they're thrown around with such ignorance, it's up to those of us who use our voice to stop the damage and to stop the hate.
Excellent. So now.
Hey guys, welcome forward. We're a new type of doctor's office that's providing preventative primary care. We've got.
So the kids got it. As a former teacher, I love when kids express themselves with great passion and with sincerity and truthfulness. I just want to give you a sense of where we've been as Abraham's Table and where we're going in the few minutes until our Muslim brothers and sisters return. So this is actually our 3rd program on hate. We decided back in April to hold a forum here at the Suffolk Y in which we had witness talks, Asian, LGBTQ, African American, Jewish, people who had experienced hate, a very powerful evening, Latino. We had fellow Lucero, Marcelo Lucero's brother. He was, remember the young man who was murdered in Patchogue? Marcelo, his brother, spoke. Really, really powerful evening. And then 2 days later, we came here for Holocaust Remembrance Day. And that was also powerful, right in this room, hearing survivors of frankly, of the churches that were silent, that could have stood up and protected them. In fact, there was a song at the beginning of that program. You may recall if you were here, some of you were here, a beautiful song about the pain of the silence that caused the Holocaust, of people who could have spoken. So that brings us to tonight. And then going forward, we're going to have 2 more programs. On November 6th, which is very close to the 84th anniversary of Kristallnacht. I think you all know Kristallnacht translates as Night of the Broken Glass, probably the worst pogrom against Jews ever. And some say, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, some say it was actually the beginning of the extreme violence of the Holocaust. So to commemorate that on November 6th here at the JCC, we'll be having a panel. Looking at the relevance, what does Kristallnacht say about now? What does the silence of the faith community then say about now? And then on the weekend of Martin Luther King, which would be January 13, 14, 15, and 16, we are going to call upon faith communities throughout Long Island to participate in a menu of activities, whether it's a sermon, whether it's a prayer service, whether it's a children's choir, whatever it is. We want people all over Long Island to step forward on that weekend. And what better weekend, right? Dr. King preached love, not hate. So these are down the pike. This is what we're planning to do. But let's now return to the Q&A. Can I jump into my question?
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you. So I am the community outreach coordinator. My day job is community outreach coordinator for Long Island Jobs with Justice. And we've done a lot of work over the last 5 years, frankly, asking pastors and imams and rabbis, why is it so hard to preach about justice in your Long Island congregation? And I love that every one of you said, we have to mobilize, we have to pressure the elected officials, we have to do something. But when I left teaching and went to Catholic Charities to be a public policy advocate, my brother asked me, what are you doing? And I said, well, we're going to mobilize congregations all over Long Island to speak for justice. And he was staring ahead and he said, you're going to mix religion and politics? And I said, well, actually, that's what I'm going to do. And he said, listen, as an older brother would say, right? Listen, I don't go to mass for politics, we're Catholic. I go to mass for peace. And we actually have 5, 10 workshops with the pastors and rabbis and imams. And they said, frankly, the people in the congregations don't want to hear what you said tonight. They don't. They don't want you to go into the pulpit. They don't want you to say pressure the congressman. They don't want to even talk about this stuff. So that's kind of a tough question, but anybody want to try to answer that? How do we overcome that Long Island fear of getting involved in politics and religion?
So I think you're going to answer, but you don't have this problem. So
Maybe, no, and if anyone does have that problem, I have other churches they can go to where we can work that out. In all the Abrahamic religions, you have prophets, and they might not have been liked by the people. There is no separation of your being from your interaction in the world. If you don't go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque that is talking about things that are relevant to you in your context, then again, I know a church where you can go to where we'll talk about the issues that you're having in your context. The only reason why religion and spirituality exists is to speak to the human condition. And if there are so many things that are going on in your neighborhoods, in your counties, in your towns, and you go to church and not speaking about it, then why go? the call for us is to justice. The call of God is to just to love one another, is justice. And so we have to speak about that. And frankly, tell your brother, come talk to me, we'll have a conversation, so he'll understand that it must be nice to say, I don't go for that. But that's what most of the people that I know go for. And they may not want to hear it, and they may disagree with me, but they can't disagree with the theology of it. And that's just justice, it's love. And that's hard for us to deal with when we really get down to it. Because what that looks like, some of us might be in positions of privilege, and then we have to, wait, you mean I had to give up something? Because so we don't like to deal with that, but we like to go to church, or we like to go to our, so Brother Fred said we have to get uncomfortable, and we do, right? We have to challenge ourselves, or we have to want to challenge ourselves, and a lot of us don't. But I think that's changing. Well, you're here today, so I know it's changing.
So what I'd like to do is just open it up to see if there are any questions or things that you would like us to cover before I go back to the panel for their thoughts and their closing remarks. Yes?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank the Y here for sponsoring this. My last time here was many years ago when Roberta Richin on the Council for Prejudice Reduction held a conference here, and I lugged in some equipment so that she could do that. So here, okay, thank you. Is it on now? Okay. Well, I think when you ask the question, is it on? Okay. I'm sorry. When you ask the question about people not wanting to hear about justice, I think it's partly because there's a fear that the faith communities will be merely politics, because politics has become sort of the religion of many Americans these days. And I think the faith communities can add a depth to show that it goes much deeper than that. So you were talking about love and justice. It comes to mind Martin Luther King, of course. He was a philosopher. I'm a philosopher. He did his PhD at Boston University on Gandhi. And what he used was Satyagraha. It was firmness in the truth. And that's how he used love to fight injustice. And so I think the reason why people are afraid is that they'll stay merely at the level of politics. I think people are angry and in tribes because they think that it's merely political.
So are you asking a question?
Yeah, okay, so I was just saying, but this is when, so the question I was noticing is that one thing I noticed that's absent from the panel are sort of the white evangelical church. I was kind of thinking about this issue. I went back and looked in 2016, about 80% of the white evangelical church voted for Trump. And I think that's something that needs to be thought about. What is happening with that faith community? Before I came, the news on the television was about the Sandy Hook guy. He was making about $80,000 a day using the airwaves for hate. And so Dr. Isma said, she quoted the scriptures from the Quran. Well, I think of the three temptations of Christ in the wilderness. The first temptation was to turn bread into stones into bread. Well, look at how the church has turned airwaves into money.
So your question is?
There are other faith communities that are missing that need to be as part of this conversation. Let me respond.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
I just whispered over to the pastor. I'm a United Methodist, and one of the things that's part of the Wesleyan tradition, United Methodism, is social holiness. That we believe that not only do you have personal holiness, but you have a responsibility in a social setting to look for holiness in that context. So the answer to your question is, and United Methodist Church is not without its own fractionalization, okay? But the answer, I believe, to your question is, where are they? Is that there is also a resistance to engage. When asked, and I will just tell you, I've invited some folks to come sit down and talk to me. I said, I'll meet you in the middle of a highway at a byway, and we can just have a discussion. And folks don't show up. That's part of the fear also. Because one of the things that we saw over the past 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, is the resistance to truth and facts. My world is full of proof. That's I gotta prove something. But that didn't turn out to mean a hill of beans to folks who were in control, governmental, and then that morphed into it. So the answer to your question is, we have to get people that are willing to come and have a conversation that means that they're willing to engage their intellect and not be fear mongers. So that's my answer to your question, is that we cannot stop making the invitation. And maybe your question says there is someone missing from this conversation, and I believe that you're right. When you talk to yourself, you start answering those questions the way you want to have them answered. So we do need to have those conversations, but thank you for raising that.
So Rabbi, you kind of said that as well, that some of it is ignorance and some of it is fear, but we have to just do a better job of bringing people along, right? You want to add anything?
Years ago, I heard somebody interviewed on NPR. I think he was with one of the Klan or neo-Nazi organizations, and he said he didn't hate anybody. He just, thought different groups should be separated. That wasn't about hate. I'm concerned about some of this language. Just we created through the Huntington Anti-Bias Task Force, on which I serve, the Hate Has No Home in Huntington lawn signs, and we were all very happy about them. But it wasn't until after they were printed and on my lawn and on my synagogue's lawn for a long time that I thought, who are we speaking to? Does anybody really think this applies to them? And I wonder if instead we could have some positive language, not just what we don't want, but what we do want. And Professor Mark, mentioned Dr. King, and I was, reading today of Dr. King and John Lewis, and their focus was on the beloved community. What we can build, and the faith of acting as though it is there, and we can already live into it and build those relationships. Now, it's important, I think sometimes, we might hear that word beloved community and we think it's like we sit around and just hug each other. But it was very specific to people's needs being met and to justice. I think there are just two things I want to say, and then I'll give you the mic back. Rabbi Israel Salanter said, somebody's physical need is my spiritual need. And I don't think that that's a church and politics question, right? I think that we don't see our faiths always as social, or some people don't see their faiths as social, societal.
Personal.
Jewish tradition, the Torah is essentially like a constitution for the Jewish people. Like, let's figure out how to build a just society. That's what it's about. And it says over and over again, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, love the stranger because you were a stranger. The whole point of that is to remember our suffering so that we have compassion and empathy for those who are suffering when you know, when you get out of Deuteronomy, get to Joshua, when you get into the land and settle it, and then are a settled, you know, satisfied people that you don't think, I've got it all. I don't have to worry about anybody else. And, you know, I think that that's something that many people see happening. We got ours, and we're not going to think about anybody else. We're going to put the ladders behind us. And whether it's, you know, we forget our suffering so we don't have compassion, or our suffering caused us trauma, so we're just going to build the walls around us. I think those are also two serious issues. This weekend, Jews all over the world commemorate the destruction of the temples in Jerusalem and the loss of sovereignty and the exile, you know, 2,000 and 2,500 years ago. A lot of us aren't looking to rebuild the temple and offer animal sacrifices. I think the point of this weekend's fast is to remember that people still are dealing with destruction. You want to think about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem? Just look at Ukraine, or look at Ethiopia, where there are wars going on and people are starving. That's what our religion is for.
Thank you.
Well, my name is Deborah Roberts, and I've had, on Long Island, I've had a long history of working in politics behind the scenes, working for pro-choice and other social justice issues. And there's a lot that's happened here. During the golden age of my efforts, there was a very vibrant and effective National Organization of Women PAC, Political Action Committee, that raised money separate from the 501, C3 now, because it has to be separate, just like political action has to be separate from church and synagogue and I'm losing terminology here, and any religious entity's life. So that PAC interviewed political candidates, rated them, questioned them within an inch of their lives, publicized the character, the qualitative answers to key questions that included not just women's issues, but also LGBTQ, racial justice issues, a whole myriad of things, health and welfare issues, because women's issues is not simply the delivery of abortion on demand. It's much wider than that, because that's what women do.
So are you suggesting that that's what we do?
Yes, I am suggesting that what I'm hearing two key things that I heard from you, Tracy, Ms. Edwards.
Tracy's fine.
Oh, Tracy's fine, and Debbie's fine. And the Reverend, a need for lobbying and a need for political action committees that are grabbed from your congregations to do both. As you said, love is an action of many different, there's work. You're laboring in the fields. You are not going to be rested. You are going to work your tush off to find out, identify, and disseminate the information of who the good candidates are. And then these people start to sit up and take notice. And during the golden age of the women's movement in Suffolk County, we were able to transform the complexion and the composition of what the Democratic Committee in Suffolk County. Now, what happened was—
Don't tell us what happened.
Well,
we only have a couple of minutes.
We aged.
Okay.
We got tired. I mean, I was among the youngest of the most active. I'm 71. I've lost at least 5 of my colleagues. They're gone. The younger generation put their feet up on the bus and said, well, I don't need this. And they lost Roe. The loss of Roe was not just simply the organization of the religious right. The loss of Roe was the complacency of the generation that we labored for, but some of them were complacent, and some of them were too damn busy because they got those promotions we fought for. They were the people we wanted them to be and didn't have the time. So that's the problem. We need lobbying, and we need political action committees that can move, organize, disseminate the facts to get out the votes.
Okay, thank you, Debbie.
So
So I think that leads us to a good final question. It's a perfect segue, and I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Isma, and then go all the way down the line. Is what should the Long Island's faith community, what should their response be now to rising hatred in our region? Because I think that what Debbie said is a good segue into that final question. What should we do now?
Thank you, Tracy. So two things where people are afraid to have conversations. One is justice, one is equity. Why? Is because both these discussions challenge the integrity of institutions. We need to address it.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, thank you. So we need to have candid, open, meaningful, action-oriented discussions and then actions around justice and equity. Hate is a manifestation of lack of justice and inequities. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Okay. What should we do now?
Don't give up. It is so easy to get so tired, right? That you just can't keep giving up. I think one of the things that we've got to understand is that it's our job to leave this place better than when we came into it. And part of that requires a level of vigilance, that requires us not to be tired. Now, I'm just going to tell you, there might be some folks in this room that are tired. Anybody? But that's the trap. The trap is that you would then fall into the sense that, well, I'm done. I'm not going to do that anymore. Or I'm not going to encourage the young people that you saw, that you may have seen put their feet up in the bus. And I'm just going to tell you, there's a lot of that going on. But I think that the answer really is don't give up on each other. Push each other to the point where we can try and encourage those that are coming along with us, behind us, and alongside of us to say we can, as opposed to, oh, well, it's a lost cause. I'll just tell you, we did lose, and Rabbi, you hit this right on the head. We got out organized and got outsmarted. And those churches where these things were being said, those folks weren't running because somebody was doing that hate, fear mongering from the pulpit and got people to sign up and glom onto it and learn all those crazy signs that we saw up there. Don't think that that's not happening as along with religion. So that's not the answer in terms of where hate should be. But we also have to make sure that we cannot be afraid of requiring each other to not be tired. Because I'll just tell you, there's a lot of times when you go up against these institutions and governmental systems that you can get worn down real quick. But a stone not only wears you down, it also hones you and makes you sharp. It depends on how you just hold the blade. So be the blade that turns against that stone that wheels around, and don't be made dull, be made sharp.
Thank you. Reverend Thorpe, what should we do now?
To me, it's just everyone should go home. Think about something that's very important to you. Whatever it is, it may be whatever it is. If it's LGBTQ rights, if it's whatever it is. Think about that thing and say, I'm going to do something about it. Then the next day, you go online and you find some groups that feel the same way about that thing. And then you try and join that, and you work with that group. Brother Fred has Long Island Advocates for Police Academy. That's right. He said, hey, come and you go. You have the NAACP. There are people out here who believe what you believe, and if we just decide one thing, just one thing. Now, I'm not saying you can't change, but one thing that you feel passionate about that's happening in this world, to you, to someone you know, and then start looking at that. And then you'll see that you are connected to a lot more people. And then you'll start building this momentum, and it'll move into different and other avenues that you may not have thought. But just pick one thing and commit to that for the next year. Say, I'm going to do what I can about this one thing that I care passionately about. And I think you'll start to see a change, and you'll see that there's people around you or near you or maybe far away from that believe in the same thing. And that's how movements build.
Rabbi Newman, what should we do now?
Thank you. You know, we're here tonight as faith communities, not just random community groups, most of us. And I think as faith communities, the word is faith. And in Jewish tradition, the word faith is emunah. It's not dogma, it's not belief, as Lewis Carroll wrote in Alice in Wonderland, in 6 Impossible Things Before Breakfast. It's actually from the same word as steadfastness. You said about what a stone does. A stone also can provide support. We see that word emunah in the story of the fight of the Israelites against Amalek. When Moses' arms are up, the Israelites are winning, and when he gets tired, they lose. Aaron and Hur hold his arms up and place a rock under Moses, supporting him. They hold his arms up in emunah, be'emunah, not in faith, it's not belief, in steadfastness. So I think our message as faith communities is to be steadfast, and I think also what our traditions put out as you said, Fred, hope. It is not pie in the sky. It is, a grounded belief that we can and we must make the world a better place. Jews say at the end of every prayer that we are working to leitaken olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world in the kingship, or not kingship, sovereignty, or guidance of the divine. That's our commitment when we pray, right? So we need to not forget that. We pray because we're making a commitment to then go out. And we need to do that together. I'm excited that my congregation is having a potluck brunch with Masjid Noor, our local community mosque in Huntington, at the end of the month. Nobody said, well, what do you guys think about this? And what do you guys think about that? And I'm not sure we can sit together because we might disagree about Israel-Palestine. I'm sure we do, some of us. But let's ask the questions after we meet.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn this over back to Dick, and I want to thank all of you for your really thoughtful responses, and don't give up. Join an organization, hope, steadfastness, and what we need to do is dig out that proclamation and see if we can re-energize people and hold them accountable.
I just looked it up. Long Island Advocates for Police Accountability. It's on .org. It's right on there. Sign your name onto it. Long Island Advocates, LIAFPA.org. Or you can go on Facebook and you can sign up. It looked like there were over 400 people that signed up.
And that was the Hate Has No Home Here
Hate Has No Place
pledge. And maybe that's a good start for us to try to see if we can get some agreement. Well, thank you very much.
Just
food thought. Some of you may be struggling with the concern when we heard about Dobbs. And, you know, we separate religion and politics because we don't want dogma imposed on people. So this is not about when life begins. That's a dogmatic position, and there are differences. I love it. I think each of you said it is the core of who we are. To treat people with dignity, to make the world better. It's what Scripture tells us to do. This is not about imposing, you know, did Christ rise from the dead? It's not about imposing, did Moses separate the Red Sea? It's about who we are as people of faith, and that is to make the world better. And boy, did you guys really, really summarize that. You were wonderful. So let's thank our panel. Folks who've been watching up there on remote. And I invite you back November 6th, Sunday, November 6th. We'll be remote and in person. Let's go back to the silence of the faith leaders at Kristallnacht, and let's talk about what that means for us today. And then the weekend of Martin Luther King, all over Long Island, we're asking people of faith, stand up and do something to say this has got to stop. So thank you for coming, and thank you all so much for a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Good night.
Dick, what time? Dick, what time in November?